Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. So, a few announcements up front. Problem set 6 is due next week, and you should be working on the warehouse project and hopefully being somewhat partly started or halfway through part B by now, because that's going to be due in 2 weeks here, and both part A and part B are due at the same time the week after problem set 6. I also suggest that as soon as you get problem set 6 done, you take a look at the Ice Rover project, just read through it, kind of get a feel for what it's asking you to do so you can be thinking about it. Because you just have 2 weeks to do it after the warehouse project, and you really need a week of thinking time in addition to those 2 weeks of programming time. So, at least read through the Ice Rover project. All right, so we have several questions, and the first four basically boil down to how do I do part B of the warehouse? So I'm going to talk about part B of the warehouse and try to hit all these questions, and Matt can check me and make sure I've answered all the top four questions there when I get done. So, assuming you've done part A of the warehouse. If you haven't, go do part A. It's probably easier than part B, and you need to get that done first, anyways. You have a path planner, probably an A-star based grid based path planner, just like in the lecture. And you have it going out and getting a box and coming back to the goal and dropping it off in the goal and then going off to get the next box. So, how do you move from this part A solution to your part B solution? And there's two ways. There's the easy way, and then there's the hey, you're a master student, you're going to figure out the cool way to do it yourself. So, the easy way that is using all of the stuff in the lecture and not making you go off and research Theta Star on your own is to use an A star path planner in a discrete world, but translate that so you can use the output of that to give directions to this robot in a continuous world. So how this will work is essentially you have a grid in your continuous world because everything's still in the coordinate system. The problem is that the walls are one grid unit in size, and so what you generally will be wanting to do here is making a smaller grid, a subgrid. So you take every unit square and you divide it down into smaller sizes. Now, your robot width is zero point 0.5, a half a unit wide. And so that means your robot has to have some space on either side of it. So the most space you can have if you have two walls and an opening to get into is you have 1 unit of width there. And so you have 0.25 on either side of your robot. So you have to kind of keep your robot within kind of 0.25 of the center of that space. So generally what you'll want to do is have a little bit of padding on either side of those walls that your robot doesn't come into. And so what you can do is say take your unit square and divide that down into something else, like maybe a 9 by 9. And the nice thing about using odd numbers, 5 by 5, 7 by 7, 9 by 9, 11 by 11, is that the center square is actually going right down the middle of that aisle. And then you can say, well, some of these squares on the outside, I'm going to convert into walls or padding and say don't use those at all, never go into those squares. And if you do it right, the center of your robot will never come within 0.25 or zero point 0.3 units of any obstacle, because there will be no squares that can attach into that. So the idea of padding around boxes and walls is that you mark certain squares as not traversable. And the reason to mark them as not traversable is because if the center of your robot goes into that square, you risk brushing against the corner of a wall or a box. Um, so you might want to think about, well, how much padding do I want to do? And that's based on the size of your subunit squares. And obviously, a 3 by 3 takes less processing power than a 9 by 9. But with a 3 by 3, you really don't have a lot of granularity there. You basically have, okay, we can go down the center of this space and we'll have to mark the two side spaces as don't go in there. And that can get you into some trouble as you see about it. But another thing to keep in mind is you don't need to path plan the absolute entire route. You just need to get within kind of 1 unit of your box or 1 unit of the drop zone. So you're using your A-star path planning to say, hey, get me from the drop zone to the box. Now, at the end of that A-star path planning, if you're a little bit more than 0.5 units away from the box, you can just inch forward a little bit until you're close enough to pick it up. Um, Keep in mind that your robot has a little more tolerances if it's approaching in a horizontal or a vertical point, because if you're approaching diagonal, you kind of have a corner to corner thing going on there. And so technically, the robot is really treated as a square when it's doing collision detection. So you'll want to kind of, if you can do corner to corner, there's enough room to do it. It's just a little tighter. So it's easier to come in horizontal or vertical. But if you're careful about it and get your math right, you can do corner to corner still, to get within zero point 0.5 units to pick things up. So the general idea is you take your continuous space and you discretize it by making each unit into a grid, a small grid world of 9 by 9 or whatever, and then you just have to have functions that convert between your grid coordinate space and the continuous coordinate space, and that's just a matter of math. You'll need to get the math right, because if you get it wrong, things are going to mess up and you'll have horrible errors. But once you get it right, you should be able to essentially take your part A path planning and run it in part B. And you might need just a little bit at the very end to say, hey, inch closer to this box, pick it up, and then go back and deliver it. Um, so you can get that working even if the cost is horrible, because you're making tiny little steps as you move through these tiny little grid squares. Your cost in part B is one for every step you take, and then one the amount of distance you travel. And so what you want to do is you want to consolidate as many tiny little steps together into one big motion up to max distance, such that if you have a whole bunch of little things where you're going beep 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 going up in a straight line, you just combine them all into a single direction going up. But I'd say don't worry about the cost, get it working first. So even if it takes you 500 motions to go and get the box and come back and drop it off, get a solution that doesn't crash into anything. And then you can worry about smoothing your path and collecting together all these little steps into one big step. Now, if you have an A-star path planner that's doing a lot of little zigzags, you either want to bias it to only doing vertical or horizontal steps just so it makes it easier to collapse together, or you can use some of the path smoothing to try to make straight lines out of these zigzaggy paths. But generally, your A-star path planner should try to go in mostly straight lines, so you only have the zigzag problem if you're really doing true diagonals. And so one thing you can think about is, well, if I know I'm doing this zigzag, pick the point here and the point there, and you can kind of collapse it together into a straight line, as long as you're not going around a corner of any walls, or you're going to hit a box or something like that. So you can do some tricks with collapsing your moves together after you get a path that works. But I'd say, first of all, focus on getting a path that works and doesn't hit anything, and then worry about reducing your score as you go through it. So how to pad boxes and walls? Well, basically, you need to pad enough so that the center of the robot doesn't get within 0.25 units of them. And you probably want to do something like 0.3 just to make it nice and give you a little bit of extra space. And that way, your path planner will never plan a path within 0.3 units of any of the walls or boxes. And so that's kind of what you do there. Okay, so Matt, how did I do on hitting those first four questions?
Yeah, I think you got them.
Okay. All right. So go on with the questions after that now.
So the next question would be, are there additional complexities in getting Warehouse Project to production level to, say, deploy at Amazon Warehouse, for example?
Oh, yes. There are companies that have made lots of money, and have been purchased by Amazon simply because they started working on those additional complexities. Obviously, you have meat bags walking around the warehouse that you don't want to run into and kill. You also have more than one robot, and they're dynamically moving around, so you have to avoid other robots that are dynamically moving around. And then there's optimization issues of, you need to gather 15 items for one order. Is it better to have one robot go and get those 15 items and put them in one box, or have two or three robots gather them in two or three different boxes and then present them to a human packer, and the human packer dumps three different boxes into the final cardboard box that gets shipped out? And so that kind of depends on where all the items are and where the robots are right when they get the order to go get these things. There's actually some pretty cool robots at Amazon that lift entire shelves, and so they have shelving units that are a couple hundred pounds, and a robot that drives underneath it lifts up a jack and jacks the whole shelf up and then drives the shelf to where it needs to be. And so humans can stand in place and shelves come by them and they pick out the things. So actually the picking is the hardest part of the job. Robots are very good at moving containers or things that are of a set size around, but picking a thing of Oreos out of a box without crushing them, or a soft-sided whatever, a little envelope full of soft things is really difficult from a robotic arm standpoint. So a lot of robots in warehouses are used for moving around the the bigger containers that have things in them, and then humans pick and place the stuff that they're actually doing.
Ready?
Yes.
So the next one would be, does the time commitment of 2 weeks for Ice Rover make sense? And what general tips do you have for it?
All right, so I think it makes sense. This is the summer, so obviously more time is better. I do recommend that you finish the SLAM lessons and problem set 6 quickly, so you'll have seen SLAM and had some time to digest it, and then read the ICE Rover project document so that you'll have an idea of what's coming up. Even though you're working on part B of the warehouse, be thinking ahead of how am I going to do this or what exactly am I going to be doing for this next project. And so also, if you come to a point where you're like, I can't see straight on this warehouse part B, just put it aside for, a day, a night, whatever, and go work on getting started on the ICE Rover to kind of give yourself some resting time from the warehouse project and to get a head start on ICE Rover.
And I would recommend, I mean, this is the summer semester. Everyone likes to take some time off during the summer. Once you finish Ice Rover, you're done. So get to it as early as you can. When you get it, go to the beach or something.
Exactly. There's no need to wait for the deadline to submit it.
Right. We got a follow-up question. I am getting a 0.15 score, but have collisions. So someone in case sorry. This is phrased a little odd. I guess the student's getting a 0.15 score due to the cost overrun.
Okay.
Should you worry about consolidating moves or should you fix the collisions?
I would say you should probably fix the collisions because a collision adds, I think it's 100 to the cost.
Yeah, I think that's
I'm
right.
remembering that. So, I mean, you can do a lot of little moves and still not get up to 100. So I'd say you kind of also your collisions are because your path planning is bad or because you're trying to come. So when you get a path that's a high cost path, it's just going up and it's wiggling around obstacles and it's doing a lot of zigzags and making a lot of little moves. You want to get that path not colliding first, and then you want to smooth the path and consolidate into a minimal number of moves. So I think the thing to solve is make sure your path planning works and can give you a collision-free path, and only then try to consolidate your path to get a lower cost path, because a collision will give you a cost of 100 there, and it can also throw off all your following moves. So usually if you have a collision, it's very difficult for the rest of your moves to work correctly because you've stopped moving from where you think you should be. So, my suggestion is you definitely want 0 collisions before you start trying to optimize the actual cost of your path.
Okay. No more questions right now. Nothing in
Okay.
the in the Google Hangout or the YouTube chat, and
Okay.
nothing on Slack.
All right. I think there was one follow-up question somebody asked when Sebastian's next office hour is, and my understanding is that's the week of July 17th. So not next week, but the week following. That will be Sebastian's second office hour. All right. We will see you all next week.